So the evolution that Safe Havens Dialogues has done with equity, diversity, and inclusion is now it's equity, inclusion, and individual engagement. Am I
Yes.
getting? Okay, so can you tell me why diversity was taken out of that acronym? Can you elaborate a little bit more on the principle?
Yeah, there are a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
One, uh, we are looking at individuals who are there in the situation. So diversity has already been taken care of. They're there.
That's what I figured. Okay. Yeah.
And so the issue is not the diversity part per se, because diversity got us in the door.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the other reason why we do not look at diversity is that diversity, although it was a good way to identify, marginalized individuals, be they women, be they marginalized because of ethnicity, because of gender, because of sexual orientation, age. It's easy to count for that.
Mm.
However, that's a metric. The real issue is that individual being recognized for the contributions that they're making? Is that individual being rewarded? Is that individual being included? Mm-hmm. Is that individual being treated fairly? Is that individual being given an opportunity to advance in the organization?
Yeah.
And those are the key issues. Now, so we dropped off diversity, simply saying, okay, we're here. Let's deal with what the real issues are. Mm-hmm. And there are some simple ways to look at equity and inclusion in an organization. Equity, for example, we said, look at three things. One, are there individuals who are being treated preferentially? Like the rules don't apply to them. It doesn't matter what they do. They may not perform well. They don't get the same. They don't get the same focus, and they're not given a tough evaluation, and they're always preferred. Mm-hmm. So it's their preference. Secondly, the processes. Are the processes there? For example, the HR processes, are they such that one could rely on those processes to address their situation? And the third is the prospect. Namely, is there a relationship between the individual's performance and their prospect of being recognized and advanced in the organization? So 3 simple ways of looking at equity in an organization. Inclusion, it is sometimes difficult. But if you look at the opposite side, exclusion, people know when they have been excluded. So we look at exclusion and we look at the microaggressions, micro assaults, micro insults, micro invalidations. Again, 3 dimensions. And you ask those simple questions. Is someone, being insulted? Yeah. Is someone's ethnicity, are they being stereotyped, being insulted, micro assault, micro insult? Is someone not being treated consistent with their achievements, with the level where they are? Are they being passed over, etc.? The micro invalidations. Are they being ignored when they're in a meeting and they raise their hand, to offer a suggestion based on their expertise, etc.? Micro invalidations. So we have these 3 dimensions in each to look at. The other thing which we actually do, there are 2 things, is that when an individual comes to us, we have them fill out a very simple form, and we ask them to respond in brief sentences or phrases, because what we want to do is to take away the emotion. So we ask, okay, what is the outcome you would like? 1 or 2 sentences. Tell us the environment that you're in. Again, in bullet form sentences. Tell us the situation that you have. And then in a sentence or 2, what do you think the problem is? So that's the one part. The other part, we have a panel whom we call our VIPs, victors in overcoming injustice in their professions. These are individuals who have, dealt with discrimination, etc. And they're the ones who listen to the case and look for the aspects that affect inclusion, the microaggressions that affect equity, preference, prospects, processes.
Mm-hmm.
And once we have that, we actually put together a matrix, what we call our equity, inclusion, culture matrix, because there's typical 2x2 matrix. And when you do that, you get 4 quadrants, and you can clearly describe the culture in an organization. If you have a culture where equity is high, and by culture we mean what an individual is experiencing.
Right.
Because, you may go to the website and the company may describe,
right.
wonderful, but an individual
yes.
not experiencing that.
Yeah.
So for that individual, is the experience of high equity, high inclusion. Mm-hmm. That's a psychologically safe environment. That individual is engaged and motivated. So we're coming to your question, why the I?
Right.
If we go diagonally down to the left, where equity is low and inclusion is low, that's a psychologically toxic environment. Individuals are distressed. Many of them leave the organization. Mm-hmm. So you can define these 4 cultures. Now, the real, I would say, for me, the real fascinating thing is that for over 30 years, Gallup has been studying literally hundreds of thousands of workers in several countries, several industries, etc., and has identified that for those companies where the individuals were very motivated, where employee engagement was in the top quartile, they had 23% greater productivity, profitability than those that were in the bottom quartile. And he's done this across several industries, countries, etc.
Wow.
So what we have simply said is, in any organization, equity and inclusion, they define the culture, they define the experience the individual is going to have. And the way to measure it is not by the number of different looking people or different histories.
Yeah.
Is by the number of people who are individually engaged.
Wow.
And so we talk about EIIE, namely equity, inclusion, and individual engagement.
I love that. And you described it so beautifully in a way that I could completely understand. So how do people connect with your work? Like, at what level? Is it the individual or the organization who reaches out to you? Could I myself just say, could I reach out to Safe Haven or to you directly and say that, I'd like this to be further looked at or examined so that I feel more included, so that I feel like I'm being treated fairly? Or is it usually organizations that take this project on and take a closer look?
Yeah, both. Actually, we've just begun really detailed marketing. We've been describing, etc. We've just begun marketing, and we're marketing to individuals. Mm-hmm. We also are marketing it to organizations, because what we're saying to organizations, if indeed, as many organizations say, our employees are our number one asset. Okay, if that is true, okay. Well, then, should you not offer something like this, where when an individual says, I've been to HR, I've talked with my manager, etc., I still don't feel like I'm being heard, which is one of the things for us. It's very important. Mm-hmm. I still don't feel I'm being heard. To offer them this program, one. The second is we can train members of the organization to be the VIPs.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask.
Yes.
Because I can't, because when I just look, even if I'm just browsing, right, like through job postings, things like that, when I just see what's out there, because I'm always just curious about stuff, you see positions posted for, somebody who's, equity, diversity, and inclusiveness. Like that's a position for one person.
Yes. Yes.
And is it really how can one person themselves do all of this, right? I really do think it takes the whole team to be aware and to take on this issue, and to keep us mindful and aware, and just be aware of how we are interacting with one another and supporting one another and putting all that into actual practice. So,
one of the things that, fortunately for me, is that when I joined industry, I joined as a mid-level manager and rose all the way up to the C-suite.
mm-hmm.
So I knew what it was to be a director at that level, and I also knew what it was to be on the board of management.
Yeah.
And I began to realize, as I reflected on what's happening, is that the leaders are responsible for equity, for setting the rules, the regulations, for telling us, who's on first, who's on second, where are the guardrails. This is how we expect you to, this is how we expect the organization to function. That's the role of the leaders.
Right.
The role of the first line supervisors, first line managers, and the work units, they're responsible for inclusion. They're the ones responsible for behaviors which acknowledge each other, behaviors which include, behaviors which say you belong, behaviors which say we value your input, behaviors which recognize your contribution. So inclusion happens at the work unit. Now,
wow, okay.
When those two are not supporting each other and reinforce, that's when we end up having, these unsafe situations, toxic cultures, etc. So when we look at the situation, we try to understand for a particular individual, where are the points of influence? Is it along the equity axis? Is that where they would have an opportunity to find a better problem to solve? Or is it along the inclusion axis? And so we have, in a way, both a visual, but in a systematic way for that individual to get the ahas.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And I'm getting that as I'm chatting with you and you're explaining it to me. It makes so much sense. Like it really does. And no one's ever explained it to me like that, though, in terms of equity and inclusiveness. And, when you explained it the way you did, based on leadership and frontline management and supervisors, that makes a lot more sense. And if those are out of alignment or out of integrity, that's where you see the lack of safety there. Just reading behind you, the title of one of your books, Addressing Systemic Discrimination by Reframing the Problem.
Yes.
This is a very fascinating title to me. So can you tell me, and I know you've been talking about this with me right now, but reframing the problem, that kind of sticks out to me. So can you tell me more about that?
Okay.
What you mean by it?
Yes. The example I gave at the beginning of my experience in Xerox is an example of reframing. Namely,
the problem.
The problem. And instead of focusing on, which is what I was focusing on, is that I was not getting a good job